Welcome to this digital gathering of the Belong Collective. We are so happy that you are with us. The Belong Collective is an inclusive, Jesus-shaped community practicing the way of love for the good of all. If you would like more information about us, please go to our website at thebelongcollective.org. If you're new with us, there is a Connect tab, and there is a card there that we ask that you fill out so that we're able to keep you up to date on all of our online happenings, like our book club, our digital gatherings on Sunday, all of those events. While you're on the website, if you would like to support us financially, there is a Give tab, and you can do that right through the website. And we do have an online store, so there is some merchandise available in there, and you're welcome to check that out as well. We love to connect with you on social media, so please check out the Belong Collective on Facebook. There is actually a separate private group, and this is a place where we can connect with each other in this time of separation. So if you would like added to that, please feel free to email us either through the website or you can contact us through that Facebook page. You can also find us on Instagram at the Belonggram, and please just tag us and share what's going on with you. We love to see what's happening. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Belong Collective. My name is Pastor Justin. So glad you could be with us this morning. Today's a little bit different. Typically, I would have a passage of scripture or a topic, and we would discuss that, talk about that. I would share a little bit about that. Today's going to be a little different. We're going to kind of do something creative, just different. I don't know. We've done Q&As before where I answer questions that maybe you send in, and that seemed to work really well. We tend to get really good responses for that. But I got an email last week, and I reached out to the person who sent me the email and asked if I could kind of use this email as a kind of the template for just the response to this email being a message. And the reason I'm doing that is twofold. One, because this is an email I receive more and more and more and more. Ever since the Belong Collective, the beginnings of the Belong Collective, I receive these emails pretty regularly, emails similar to this one. And so I thought it would be something that would be good for our community to see some of the conversations that your pastor is having on a regular basis with people who either are connected to our community or are outside of our community. And that's actually the second point, is that during coronavirus, as awful as this season has been for all of us in some way, shape, or form, I know it has been difficult for all of us. There has been some silver linings, and one of those silver linings that I must acknowledge is that the Belong Collective has grown in reach, and not just in central Pennsylvania. People from all over. I've had people reach out to me from California, from all over the United States, even from outside of the country, saying they're tuning in, watching, listening to our digital gatherings. And so we have a presence that's out there, even in our digital gatherings, beyond just our own community. And I think it's really amazing to kind of see the reach that the internet allows for. The internet is sometimes a cesspool, right? Like social media, Facebook, Instagram, all of it, YouTube. But at the same time, it can also be this amazing tool that allows for people to feel connected when maybe they don't have an opportunity to connect in the place in which they live or maybe they just don't know that a community like ours exists. And so, I'm going to read an email, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase it throughout, just because I'm going to protect the person who sent me the email's name and identity and all that, even location and all that. And there's some things in here that are potentially triggering for some people. So I'm also going to edit some of that. So as I'm reading through it, if I'm kind of self-editing while I'm reading, just know I'm trying to get the general nature of the email across to you. And then the email ends with some very direct questions. And I just want to say, these questions are questions I've received before. I've received often, actually. And I just thought it'd be really helpful for us as a community to hear these questions, to hear what I am growing to believe many people are asking, especially people with a background in the church who are struggling to maintain their Christian identity. And when I say Christian, I kind of put it in air quotes. I'm saying like their identity of going through the motions, going to church, the feeling of the church just being so disconnected from their life, their values. So without any more, I don't want to give away kind of the email. I'm going to jump right into it. And again, I'm not going to say the person who emailed me. I'm not going to say their name. But the email begins with the person saying their name and saying where they're from. I'm not even going to say where they're from. They're from a place outside of Pennsylvania, a good bit outside of Pennsylvania, another state in our country. So the author says, I was originally saved, in air quotes, back in high school, but eventually left the church after numerous bad experiences. Last year, in the midst of a lot of anxious thoughts and uncertainty, I was seeking God once again. I got involved in a local church, got connected with a young adults Bible study, and was thriving. Until that same young adults group showed me something within them that made me sick. One of the young men in the group was a local politician, and the city was preparing to proclaim a particular month, Pride Month, for the LGBTQ plus community. And the person asked for prayer in the group so that they could stand up against the worldly values being presented by the city. This person who's attending the group, who's kind of found their way back to church, immediately felt uncomfortable and upset. Then there was some things said in the meeting that were rather triggering, and I'll just leave it at that. But it was very. The reality is, in my experience, and I'm just going to use my experience because I don't want to use the person who sent me the email's experience. I don't want to share this triggering point is what I guess I'm trying to say, but the church has a history of being homophobic. And in my experience, there's very few things, it's very unlikely that leadership will step in and express concern when someone says something that's, hurtful. But what's even more concerning is that often it is actually the leadership that's participating and leadership that's saying things. And anyway, he shares how the young adults group kind of said some things that were incredibly hurtful. And he says he left being sad and furious. And he didn't speak to the group, but he did send a message to the pastor who oversaw the group and voiced concerns. And he says, days, weeks went by, and I had no reply. Until eventually the pastor replied. He then proceeded to compare, and this might be triggering for some people, being LGBTQ plus to being a pedophile, and told me that if I truly believed that LGBTQ plus people should be able to be married and whatnot, that I am not understanding the Bible. He went on numerous rants about how I seem to read the Bible and am not smart enough to understand it. This threw me into a pit of depression. A week later, I was furloughed from my job. From there, once again, I abandoned God. This was all last summer. I just want you to think about last summer. Man alive, so many of us were going through so much. I couldn't imagine also this being thrown on top of that. Since then, I have tried numerous other times to get back on track, and it goes well for a day or two. That back on track is speaking spiritually, I believe, or maybe connection with the church. And it goes well for a day or two, then it falls apart again. I look at it as trying to build a home with no foundation. I have no foundation for my faith or anything. So trying to build upwards keeps resulting in everything crumbling down. The individual then goes on to say, I'm a firm believer in LGBTQ plus rights, justice rights for disadvantaged communities, BLM movement, like goes on and on to say this, and then says it's so hard to see the churches lack of care, lack of concern, and even overtly taking the opposite side on these things. And the author says, I want to believe that God is actually there and is actually love. But how am I supposed to see that and feel that when people who claim to love and follow God follow an ideology so full of hate? The author then says, I found your digital gatherings after looking for affirming pastors and churches, and I found your videos you have on your YouTube channel. It was a relief hearing the way you think and explain things, but I still have so many questions that are becoming roadblocks for my faith. So before we go any further, I just want to say we're in a moment, I think. I think we've been in a moment for the last couple years, and we're probably going to be in this moment for a while. But I think the moment, just before I kind of reference these questions, the moment is that there is a growing number of people that see LGBTQ plus rights, justice issues in our world, so many of the social justice movements that are happening. And when I say social justice, that's triggering for some people, but I'll say it because Jesus stood up for those things in his time. Jesus was about economic justice in his time. Jesus was about championing people who were outcasts in his time. The systems of oppression that existed in Jesus' day, he was bringing a whole different perspective to, and the church is called to do the same. And too often, we're seeing the church is failing to acknowledge justice issues in our world, and if anything, going on the other side of it, making it even worse. And so, when I talk about the moment we're in, this email is not unique. I could probably pull up 50 emails that I've received, or Facebook messages or Instagram messages from people, maybe even more. It honestly becomes a conversation that I have so much that I have to actually stop and remind myself that, like, and this is hard for me, but I have to stop and remind myself the church is not evil, because it has sent me in a tailspin at times to just believe the church is nothing but evil, because you get so attached to these stories of brokenness. You get so you hear about the spiral of depression that this person was sent in, and you hear that from so many people that eventually you just believe, what are these places doing? And why do I carry the title pastor? And I'm not going to lie, there's been part of me that struggles with it, because that title, while that is what I do, I am your pastor, that title also is difficult to share with people who have had an experience like this. When I meet these people out in public and they ask, what do you do? And I say, I'm a pastor, they immediately associate me with this person who took forever to respond to a very probably upfront email. And then when they did responded with saying, well, you know what, you just aren't, smart enough to understand the Bible. And hey, you know what, being part of the LGBT community is akin to being a pedophile. Like, I get associated with that because I have the title pastor, because quite honestly, the majority of people within my profession, that would not surprise me if they said that. And so, we live in this world where these emails are emails I'm receiving. And I don't want to center it on me. I'm centering it on us, because I think the Belong Collective as a community, we have this opportunity to say that direction that the majority are taking over there is not the way of Jesus. And there's something happening right now where I think there's a lot of people whose eyes are opening to the inconsistencies, the patterns of abuse, the brokenness that has just been prolonged in so many people's lives in the shadows. Those stories are starting to be shared. I mean, I haven't even mentioned in everything I've mentioned so far how women have been treated in the church. There's just so many stories and so much revelation happening right now, where eyes are being opened. And as those eyes are being opened and these problems are beginning to come to leadership's attention, and we're just seeing the systemic failure of them being addressed in any meaningful way of change. And it's leading to people leaving. And most people have been taught, if you're not here, you can't be anywhere. If you're not with us, you're with no one. Or if you don't believe like we believe, you're going to hell. And this moment, I think, is a moment that we have an opportunity to step into because of our own experience as a community, because of our own eyes being opened and hearts being changed, and us making that transition into the Belong Collective because we couldn't stand still. We couldn't just allow the status quo to be maintained while so many others could. So there's some direct questions here, and I want to get to those. But I just want to say, if you're here and you're listening and you're part of the Belong Collective, like you consider the Belong Collective your home, I hope this email disturbs you first and foremost, and that you recognize that like this is something happening right now. There's a groundswell moment taking place right now. But then I also hope there's a certain amount of you that's like encouraged, like that our community is having some semblance of reach even beyond our own local area, but that we might get to be like hope bringers to this population that's in exodus, you know? We might get to provide a way for some people who feel a certain amount of despair and brokenness and lack of spiritual connection to God anymore, that we might be able to say, you know, there's possibility beyond what your current experience is or what your past experience was. So here's the questions. How am I supposed to have faith? The concept is a huge stumbling block for me. How do I know that God is actually there and it's not just a mental thing going on? I don't know. Your first question is a resounding, I don't know. Faith is like a mystery. Like how we have faith in a God is a mystery. I can give you like the apologetics answer, which is like, let me try to formulate some reasons why you have to believe in God and kind of like convince you to believe in God. Like I have all those answers. I took apologetics in college. I have, you know, I used to, we used to even like debate apologetics, like with people and stuff. Like it's just a whole framework of a way of convincing someone logically that God exists. But there's a certain amount of who God is that is not able to be logically understood. And I would actually say a good portion of God, our understanding of God might be partially logic, but much of it isn't. And I think the problem is we've been taught that like we can't admit that. We can't admit that there's a certain amount of mystery here. There's a certain amount of like belief and faith is not this idea that like I have all the answers. Apologetics gives me all the answers, right? You know, there's this other factor in that like faith, like the way you and I have probably been taught, and I'm speaking directly to the writer of this email right now. The way you and I have probably been taught to hold our faith is without any doubt. And so if that's how you've been taught to hold your faith your whole life, the moment you have any doubt, you feel like I can't have faith because you think faith, you've been trained, you've been conditioned to believe that faith is the absence of all doubt. And it's just not true. When we read the Bible, we see so many characters who have doubts and they're still following God amidst all the doubts that they're struggling with. And so acknowledge your doubt. Acknowledge even that you might doubt God exists and sit with that. Like what emotion does that bring up? What spiritual connection can you find even while you're acknowledging the doubt you have? There's a great book by Gregory Boyd titled Benefit of the Doubt. I think this is a great book for faith and doubt and just kind of the struggle it seems like that this question is coming from. I want you to know you're not alone with this question. I've had this question. I still have this question. not to get too personal, but, this past week we lost our family dog of 16 years. Like, this dog has been with us ever since my wife and I in college, and all of our kids grew up with this dog. And our son, our 9-year-old son, has just this deep connection to this dog, this deep connection. And while we're sitting there, like, just grieving the loss of this dog, like he says, why, God, why do things have to die? And you're just sitting here like, when it comes to faith and you're like sitting in those moments of grief, like you begin to recognize, like, what is the point of all of this if we just die? Like, I'm not trying to say logically that's like the thing. I'm not trying to use that as an apologetic or something to get you on my side, because I don't really think there's sides here. But I guess I would say, like, I do think the inverse of, like, if we don't believe in God, there's this question of, like, so what's going on? Like, if I don't believe in God, then, like, what's the point of all of this? What's the point of the longing within my spirit, within my soul, to have meaning, to have connection, to yearn for something beyond this life? Evolutionarily speaking, when a being yearns for something in our world, it's typically something the world can provide. Yet our kind of yearning for purpose and meaning and connection to something beyond just here, it's not something that the world can perfectly provide for. So I believe there's a higher power that is able to provide that, and so that requires a huge amount of faith, though, because that's not something I can prove. That's not something I can just lay out in a math problem and solve for you, even though we have systematic theology, which is this idea of, like, God being a math equation in some ways. But I digress. I guess I would say my best resource for you is Benefit of the Doubt by Gregory Boyd to that question. But it's a good question, and it's a question a lot of people are wrestling with. All right, next question. How are we to separate ourselves from the violent, hateful, bigoted evangelicals who apparently worship the same God? Am I wrong? Are they wrong? Who's wrong? Oh my gosh. So this question, again, is so difficult, because I feel like what happens, I'm just going to be super raw and real. I feel like what happens to me is I can look the other way for like 3 months, and then something happens, and, like, I have to release the valve. Like, I have to let all this pressure that's built up go. And I mean that from the standpoint of, like, when I see people storming a Capitol building, literally doing things that are the antithesis to the Jesus way, while holding Christian flags, holding Jesus Saves flags, erecting a cross, like, you see all of this religious imagery, and you just think to yourself, how do I not say something? You see stories come out of how LGBT people have been treated in churches, how women have been treated in churches, how the church has for so long championed racist policies and is doing it again. And you just wonder, like, what's the balance of pushing? Here's the way I would say it. Like, the struggle I have, and that you're probably having, is distinguishing, are there just some rooms in the house on fire, and we just need to get a bigger fire department here to take care of this? Or is this whole house on fire and I need to go find a new house? That's kind of the struggle that I think we're all kind of on. There's a part of me that is so connected to evangelicalism because that's what I was raised in. That's the type of school I went to. So I'm formed in that tradition, whether I like it or not. Whether I like it or not, I'm formed in that tradition. And so that tradition has a hold on me. I know that house very well. I know the rooms of that house very well, right? And there's so much good that has come in my life from that. Like some of my greatest memories in childhood and in life in general were in spaces, evangelical circles. So I want to acknowledge that. But I also want to say that doesn't remove my responsibility to acknowledge the harm being done by those same communities. Like it's great that I had some good experiences there, that I even had some super meaningful experiences. The problem is I have to recognize that like not everyone's having that experience. I have to acknowledge that like there's some really deep problems. So the question becomes like, from you, like, we worship apparently the same God. Well, the first thing I would say is any form of Christianity that you ascribe to, okay, this is just really important right off the bat to get to. I think this is just so valuable. Once I wrapped my head around this, it became very clear that like, okay, I don't have to try to synthesize everything. Okay. So like any form of Christianity you follow, okay. And I'm saying this to everyone, the form of Christianity you believe you follow as you're listening. All right. There is someone that thinks you're a heretic and you're going to hell that also believes in Christianity. Just think about that for a minute. There is no form of Christianity that there's not another person claiming Christianity that thinks you're going to hell for the views that you hold in your version or view or theology of Christianity. That's important to process. That's not me saying every version of Christianity believes other people are going to hell. That's just me saying that's how many kind of different brands of Christianity. I don't know what you want to call them. We obviously have all kinds of denominations, but that kind of helps me know that, okay, there's a long tradition of people believing and claiming the name of God and the name of Jesus and doing so in a way that's harmful, hurtful, abusive, and ultimately is not the way of Jesus. There's such a variety out there of people and what they believe in their way of following Jesus that I have to acknowledge that diversity. And as I look out and I see those people who are violent, hate-filled, bigoted, and evangelical, largely white evangelicals, let's just be honest about the statistics. There's plenty of statistics to back me up. I'm not saying anything that's not data-driven. When I see that those people worship the same God and I say, am I wrong? Are they wrong? Well, what are we referencing? Would Jesus shun LGBT people from the church? I think they're wrong. Like, I'm just going to say it. I'm not going to like sugarcoat this and be like, well, I don't know who's wrong. Like, they're wrong. And here's the funny thing. Like, in 40 years, those same church communities will have LGBT people in them, and they will be in places and positions of authority and power, and they will have the ability to volunteer. They will be included because history tells us that. History tells us that. The church, the white evangelical church, was against desegregation. Like they were pro-segregation in their churches and in their schools. Like very, you have to look really hard to find churches that are pro-segregation now, right? Like there's going to come a moment where the church realizes that this was wrong. The problem is, here's the big problem. Much of the racism in the church we're dealing with today is because of the systemic struggle of the way this country was formed, the way that our relationship as a country was to the African American community, and then beyond that, Jim Crow laws, the 60s in America in general of civil rights movement, and the church being so far behind on that. If anything, like Martin Luther King Jr. tells us in his letter from a Birmingham jail that he's not as concerned about the Ku Klux Klan. Like, he's not as concerned about that person as he is the white moderate churchgoer who is more concerned with like the fake idea of peace than they are with justice. And so we have to acknowledge that like this is how these systems get propped up. So the system of bigotedness, even toward the LGBT community, while there will come a time, I believe it 100%, where inclusion will take place in churches, the history of that pain will not be undone without deep, committed work to justice. And the church has shown very little history of that, especially the evangelical church, a commitment to matters of justice, especially around marginalized people groups. So, your question, are you right? Are they wrong? Who's wrong? I would say anywhere we're championing love, we're right. And by right, I'm not saying like I'm right, you're wrong. I'm saying when we're championing love, we are living out the way of Jesus. And I believe that is the right way. The way we are designed, the way we are built to live in this world is the way of love. And so what does the way of love look like even toward your enemies, even toward the pastor who sent you back the hurtful message, even toward the people in that small group who said the things that were so incredibly hurtful to you and made you angry? Even as you consider the resentment you might hold for that kind of sending you into a depressed state, what does love look like toward those people? Love is not easy. Being right, we love being right, but being right, if it means the way of love, is not easy. It's easy to be right and tell someone else they're wrong. It's hard to be right because you choose to love somebody that's being a jerk. So I would say you are right when you love in the way of Jesus. Love is patient. Love is kind, right? Like these are hard things to do for people that have hurt us. And when we think about the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, these are the things we want our life to be shaped by and marked by. And so I would say when we're living in this place of love for one another and when we're embodying the fruits of the Spirit in our life, we are being made into the image of Christ, and that is good and that is right. When people are failing to do that, and when there are systems that are consistently failing to do that, we don't just call them wrong. I'm going to be very clear. We don't just call them wrong. We call them evil because that's what they are. And so, I think that kind of answers your question. Am I wrong? Are they wrong? Who's wrong? And I think it's important to also have a lot of humility in this, in that I acknowledge even in my acceptance of the LGBT community that as a pastor, I got it wrong for a long time and I did a lot of damage. And I've reached out to people that I know that were part of conversations and tried my best to make amends where possible. And I would say like, that's the posture that the church needs. This posture of humility that owns when we're wrong too. It's one thing to say we were wrong and then move on and never actually own it and do the work to change. So yeah, that kind of answers that question. All right, 2 more questions left. Is it possible to be a Christian and not believe 100% of the Bible is historically accurate? Looking at the flood story and Tower of Babylon, etc. I love science, and Bill Nye and his debates with Ken Ham have made it very difficult for me to believe the flood actually happened. Very, very good. Okay, so real quick, just for those who don't know, Bill Nye's the science guy. You know Bill Nye. You probably don't know Ken Ham unless you were raised in evangelical circles as I was. And probably, I feel like Ken Ham's even like the deeper conservative evangelical circles. Like, or at least he can be. There's, maybe you've heard of him. But he is the one who, he came on most people's radar because he built the ark in I think Kentucky. I think it's Kentucky. He runs an organization called Answers in Genesis. And this would have been like forever ago, because I actually remember being at a live stream satellite location for it because I was very interested in this conversation. He did a debate with Bill Nye. Ken Ham did a debate with Bill Nye, and so he's referencing that. I want to say that had to be like 6 or 7 years ago. That was a while ago that took place, but I'm sure those are on the YouTube. You can go find them if you want to watch them. I think Bill Nye held his own, if anything, won the debate, because Ken Ham believes in a very literal view of the Bible, a very literal view of creation, 24 hour literal days. He's not open to other interpretations or other views. Everything has an answer. Every question you have has an answer. It is very apologetics driven. Like, I would actually say it's like hyper apologetics. Answers in Genesis is, and what I mean by that, I'm not trying to overly criticize Answers in Genesis. Honestly, you can go there and you'll probably find enough to criticize on your own if that's not your cup of tea. But I guess what I'm saying is, there's a deep desire to read a poem, which Genesis 1 is, as like a literal story, which is a problem, right? Like, there's a deep desire to take the English version of the text we have today and read it in this literal way, which does not do the text good or our faith good, I don't think, because like it does not do justice to it, because I actually think it pushes people away from the faith. Not only does it push people who believe in science away from the faith, but it also pushes people away from the faith who believe exactly what Answers in Genesis is selling. And the reason it pushes them away from the faith is because they come to a place of believing all of what they believe, and then the moment they're challenged, they don't have an answer for it, like a real challenge. Like, I could sit down with someone who, is partially open to logic and just walk them through the Bible and showed so many inconsistencies with so much of the belief, like the literal kind of belief in the Bible. And I think we kind of did this a little bit in January. If you go back, we did a lot of talking about the Bible in January. I want to say the later portion of January, early February, we were kind of talking about the Bible a lot, and I was kind of breaking down some different ways that we read the Bible at the Belong Collective. So I won't do that anymore, but I will say it is 100% possible to be a Christian and not believe 100% of the Bible is historically accurate. Yes. That's because we have two historical accounts multiple times in the text, right in the first two chapters. We have a creation story in Genesis 1. Sorry for the blue hand. I dyed my kid's hair and I forgot to wear a glove. So we have we have a creation story in Genesis 1, a creation story in Genesis 2. And when we look at these two chapters, they're very different in detail. Which one's right? Well, I believe Genesis 2 is right. Well, then you're not 100% accurate, because Genesis 1's different. Like, there's just this reality that, like, we have to pause and consider what the text is communicating. So, like, when you look at Genesis 1, the text is a poem challenging the creation narratives of its day. That's what's happening. At the time, there was a creation narrative that Tiamat and Marduk, these two gods in the skies, came into an argument. The argument became violent. One killed the other and then carved the earth out of the body of the dead god, and humans were carved out of the carcass as well. And now we serve this God who defeated this other God. In essence, we are the result of violence. We are the result of chaos. And we are here only to worship this God as the leftovers of this former God. Like, just imagine that being the predominant creation story. Like, we can't even imagine it, because, like, if you're an American but you have no Christian background, you still know, like, the God story of Jesus. Probably, you know some of the story of, like, you don't have any feeling of like, oh, I wonder if this place that we live is the remains of a former God. And I wonder if my body is the remains of a former God that was carved out of, like, you don't think that, but that was the predominant creation story at the time of Genesis 1 coming on the scene. Like, so what does Genesis 1 challenge? Genesis 1 says, no, there is a God. that created you with intention and purpose. You're created in the image of a loving God, not the image of a God that lost in defeat, that was violently trying to beat another God. Like, there's just so much that it's undoing that is not about the details of how many hours were in the day, which is a whole nother problem that answers in Genesis. By the way, this is all just off the top of my head. I did no prep for this, but I'm getting fired up because one of the things that's most frustrating here, we'll just open the Bible. I got the Bible here. One of the things that's most frustrating to me about answers in Genesis is like, what do we use to govern a day? Like, just this is probably my go-to. Like, what do we use to govern a day? We use these, as Genesis calls them, two great lights, a sun and a moon. That's what governs a 24-hour literal day, which you and I live in on the daily, right? So if you read Genesis 1, we don't get these two great lights until I believe it's day 4. Yeah, day 4. So we don't get these two great lights till day 4. It says, God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. This is Genesis 1:16. This is on day 4 of creation. So here's my question. Maybe from here forward, it's 24-hour literal days when it's referencing day. But how do we know the first 3 days are days when the things that govern the days don't even exist? Like, it's just, to me, the logic is, oh, well, that's a mystery. No, the logic is I have to answer it with certainty. If you're part of a community that has to answer that kind of a question with certainty, then they've put far more faith in their interpretation of the Bible than in Jesus. And I don't necessarily want to be a part of those types of faith communities. So I would say, as you come to the inconsistencies of Scripture, things even like the flood, which let's just go to the flood real quick. The flood is just a couple pages over here. Genesis... We'll just go to Genesis 7:24. Here's what it says. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. Now, here's the deal. The waters flooded the earth. We're in Genesis 8 at this point. We're not far removed from the garden, if you will. When the author references earth, what's being referenced here? Why do we have to believe that the entire world was flooded? We believe that because when we hear the word earth, we have a global, full understanding of earth. The known earth at that time would have been very different. Like, you could actually argue for a localized flood that would have been recorded as an earth-wide flood. They don't have CNN. They don't have Twitter. They don't have people all over saying, look, this flood didn't cover the whole earth. For them, it covered their region, which is the only region they're aware of that exists on earth. And so they record it as earth. Like, I think that is their world. Like, I don't think we recognize how the ancient writers wrote and how the ancient readers read. And when we do, we recognize our literal way of interpretation in the 21st century does not equip us for understanding that, like, when it says the earth was flooded, that does not necessarily have to mean the entire earth, because there was just a different understanding of the earth at that time. So I say that just to say, like, even when we come to the flood, like, if you don't believe a literal flood took place, okay, or even if you believe the whole Noah story is just a whole myth, which, I mean, okay, so you believe that. How is that affecting your relationship with Jesus? I want to know, like, really, like, well, it's affecting my relationship with the Bible. Okay. How's it affecting your relationship with Jesus? Like, and by relationship, I mean, how do you see Jesus? How do you understand the life teachings of Jesus? How are you embodying that life and those teachings? By winning arguments about the Old Testament? Well, that's, I guess, one way. Like, actually, that's not a way to follow Jesus. Like, or by loving your neighbor. Like, I think the better question would be, is it possible to be a Christian and refuse to love your neighbor? That's a fabulous question, right? But we've been conditioned and we've been taught that, like, it's not possible to follow Jesus. It's not possible to be a Christian if I don't believe 100% of this, even down to the smallest like idiosyncrasy, like the smallest thing. Like if I don't believe the smallest little completely irrelevant text from Genesis 8 about the earth being the whole earth or not being whole. If I don't believe that, then I can't follow Jesus. Well, look, someone taught you that and they were wrong. Someone taught you along the way that if you didn't believe that, you were going to hell or you couldn't follow Jesus. And I just want to say they were wrong. You do not have to believe 100% of the Bible is historically accurate to follow Jesus. I do believe Jesus tells us that loving others, loving our neighbor as ourselves, this is the center, not our interpretation of Genesis. So, continue to listen to those debates. There's a lot to be said. There's a lot to be known about the intersection of science and the scriptures. If anything, I think the scriptures and science are both pointing toward one another. You know what I mean? And I share a little more about this in, and I'm not trying to plug my personal podcast, but you were asking for resources, and that's actually your next question is, do you have any scriptures, books that you would suggest for me to read? Well, I've already referenced some scriptures. Maybe that's helpful. Feel free to respond back and I can share some more. But I did a podcast episode with Nathan McConkey for my podcast, Beyond Boundaries. I think it was like episode 1 or 2. It was very early on. And we talked about science. I think it was episode 1. We talked about like evolution, and we just got into a large conversation about the intersection of science and the scriptures, or science and faith. And so that might be a really good resource for you. So if you just like typed in Beyond Boundaries, Justin Douglas, Nathan McConkey, or just Justin Douglas Evolution, like you would find that. And I think that would be a good resource for you as you're kind of wrestling with some of these thoughts. There's probably some kind of nuggets in there that Nathan says, not me, because I don't really say a whole lot of smart stuff, but he'll say some smart stuff for you that'll kind of give you some things to think about when it comes to the intersection of science and faith. And he's a doctor, so he's studied science a lot. So I know nothing about science. As far as like any other books or things, I mean, I do think Greg Boyd, I have already referenced a Greg Boyd book, which is Benefit of the Doubt. But I would reference, I'll reference another Greg Boyd book, which is Letters from a Skeptic. And the only reason I reference that book is because I think it's just a really good kind of Q&A back and forth. He has this Q&A with his dad back and forth, where his dad kind of has this traditional approach to God and is refusing to kind of believe in God because of the traditional approach that he was handed. And they just start writing letters back and forth, kind of discussing their view on God. And these letters are, you'll read through it and you'll read a letter and then you'll read a response, and then it kind of sucks you in because you just want to keep reading like the back and forth. And they might take a month off here. They might reference like what's going on in family. It's just this, you get a window into like the personal relationship too, which I think is interesting. Because these are all just published letters that he wrote to his dad back and forth, and his dad wrote to him. But in that conversation, Greg does a lot to undo some of the ways his dad was conditioned to believe he had to believe in order to have a connection with God. And to kind of wrap this up, I think one of the things I'm learning is like my role as a pastor is to do some of the same, to uncondition people, people who have been conditioned to only see God a certain way, or who have been conditioned to say, like, if you don't see God this way, you can't follow God, you can't belong. Part of my role now, I really feel it, is to say, no, you can follow God in that state, in that place, with that belief, with that thought, with that reality in your life. Like, and I think that's kind of the reality of what the Belong Collective is becoming. Even amid all of our challenges in the world right now, and even with not gathering in person, there's this reality that like we are making connections with people who need our community, whether they're local or afar. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I want to continue to undo where undoing is necessary, right? Like, and champion love in every space and in every life. And so I know this, again, was unorthodox in the sense of what we typically would do for a sermon. And I just kind of riffed for a little bit here. Not really a whole lot of planning that went into this. Hopefully something in here was good for you. And ultimately, I hope the person who wrote me this email, and I'll be sending this link to them, watched this, enjoyed it, found some of it helpful, and that the rest of you who got to kind of listen in, maybe it connects with you. At the very least, you're getting a window into a reality that exists in our world, that there is this kind of exodus of the church right now. And I think we are in a position to say, we see you and we understand. So blessings to you this Sunday. I want to pray for this person who wrote me this email and all of you as well. So let's pray. Good and gracious God, I thank you for the author of this email. I just pray that you would work to reveal yourself to this individual, that they would feel you, they would just feel your presence, even as they're struggling with faith, struggling to even know what to believe, and also healing from so much damage. God, I just pray that your spirit of peace, your spirit of healing would be present in this person's life. And God, as we all seek answers and healing and faith, God, meet us all in that place. God, we pray that we would never become so attached to the right or wrong interpretation of a particular passage of the Bible that we would miss an opportunity to love. God, remind us that we've all been conditioned in some way, shape, or form. And it's not that the way we were conditioned was necessarily terrible or wrong. We just need to acknowledge that we've been conditioned, and we need to become aware of it. And when we struggle to accept something, or we struggle to see how we could follow you with something in our life, that maybe we need to consider how we might have been conditioned. And maybe we need to consider the intentions of those who conditioned us in that way. Were their intentions love? Were their intentions the fruits of the Spirit? God, we pray that you would bring your spirit of revelation even into our lives, that you would reveal to us what needs to be seen. You would give us eyes to see it, and you would give us a heart to feel it, and that you would give us hands to go out and do the work that needs to be done to restore our world. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's digital gathering. We hope you have a fantastic week, and please feel free to reach out to us via our website or any of our social media platforms. Have a fantastic day, and thanks again.